Good evening. Welcome to Congresswoman Niki Tsongas' telephone town hall meeting. This telephone town hall is like a traditional town hall meeting. It gives you a chance to hear from Congresswoman Tsongas about issues before Congress or anything that's on your mind, but from the convenience of your own home. In just a moment, Congresswoman Tsongas will give a few brief opening remarks, and then anyone on the call will have an opportunity to ask her your questions. If you'd like to ask her a question at any point during the call, simply press *3 on your phone. Since we anticipate that many people on the call will have questions, after pressing *3, you'll be connected with a member of the Congresswoman's staff who will take down some of your information so that we can connect you with the Congresswoman in turn. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible during the course of the next hour, and to do so, we unfortunately won't have time for follow-up questions. So please try to ask your full question when you come on the line with the Congresswoman. One quick technical issue that I want to point out before we get started is that there's sometimes a little bit of lag time in between questions. So please stay with us if there's a brief pause in the discussion as we move on to the next question. We will try to get to as many questions as we can over the course of the next hour, but if we are unable to get to your question this evening, you will still have an opportunity to leave it as a voicemail for the Congresswoman. To do so, please stay on the line at the end of the call. You'll be able to leave a message with your question, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Again, if you would like to ask the Congresswoman a question at any point during the call, please press *3 on your phone now or again at any point during the call. And with that, I will turn it over to Congresswoman Niki Tsongas.
Good evening, and thank all of you who are on the line for joining me today. I really do appreciate the opportunity to connect through these virtual town halls made possible by all the great technological breakthroughs we've had in the past decade or so, and it gives me the chance to speak with you from the comfort of your own homes. I certainly hope everyone is enjoying the start to summer. We all live through the most historic of winters, and it's certainly a welcome change of seasons. But in regard to this winter's record snowfall, I did want to let you know that my office is working hard with the rest of the Massachusetts delegation and Governor Baker to look at ways that the federal government can support local communities in dealing with the effects of this historic snowfall and bitter cold. For small business owners who experience lost revenues from the snowfall, you may be eligible to apply for a U.S. Small Business Administration Economic Injury Disaster Loan. That's quite a mouthful, but nevertheless, something that might be available to you, or to apply for loans through the Massachusetts Growth Capital Corporation. If you have interest or questions about that, please don't hesitate to contact my office, and we can help you navigate what the requirements are. But for now, summer is finally here, and I know that there are many issues on your minds on a whole range of topics, and I will try to answer as many questions as possible during the next hour. Again, to ask me a question or give your input at any point, just press *3 on your telephone. As you know, if you read the newspapers, the 114th Congress is now in full swing, and it has been my honor to work in your behalf here in D.C. When Congress is not in session in D.C., as it periodically is in any given month, I have always made it a point to get out into the communities I represent to talk with constituents and local business owners to see what's on people's minds. Last month, I visited several local businesses during National Small Business Week. I held a downtown walking tour in Marlborough with the mayor and city councilors, and we were able to visit a number of local establishments, including the Marlborough Savings Bank and some local restaurants. I also visited New England Peptide in Gardner, a biotech company that develops peptides and enzymes for the industrial and commercial markets, as well as for scientific research. And just recently, last week, I attended a groundbreaking for Potpourri Group, Inc. in Littleton, a catalog and e-commerce company, very innovative, that is looking to add more than 100 jobs with its new expanded facility. I believe one of the ways we can boost our economy and jobs is to support a Make It in America agenda focused on creating the best conditions for American businesses to manufacture, innovate, and create jobs right here in the United States. It's particularly important in this district that is was so rooted in the Industrial Revolution and domestic manufacturing. And yet many companies here in Massachusetts have incredible job-creating potential, from clean energy to medical technology and many more. Here in the 3rd District, we've seen real growth in high-tech manufacturing and innovative technology. To make America once again a magnet for jobs, we have to invest in manufacturing, innovation, and infrastructure while cutting red tape to help businesses grow. In the House of Representatives, I've supported a series of legislative proposals entitled the Make It in America Agenda, which takes exactly these kinds of common steps sense. It makes the research and development tax credit permanent. This really encourages companies to invest in new ideas, provides for a long-term reauthorization of a highly successful small business innovation research program across the federal government, improves and invests in workforce training and retraining. What I do hear over and over again is companies that come to Massachusetts because of our workforce, but also companies that have a hard time finding workers that have been trained to the skill set that they need. And we need to promote science, technology, engineering, and math education. I've pushed for our military to invest in American manufacturing. Last year, the Department of Defense announced that they would close a loophole in their policy, and by closing that loophole, it would boost domestic footwear manufacturers, ensuring that new recruits into the services would be wearing American-made athletic shoes. I've been working on this for several years to bring about this change, and am proud to see local companies like New Balance get the opportunity to produce a 100% American-made shoe for our nation's service members. Just this spring, one version of New Balance's shoes was given the green light as meeting the requirements of the Defense Department. As a reminder, to ask me a question or give your input at any point, just press *3 on your telephone. When it comes to public health and public safety, the 3rd District has seen some very important recent support. Just last month, the Massachusetts Firefighting Academy was awarded federal funding through a federal program. The academy, which is based in the 3rd District community of Stowe, will use about a $261,000 grant in funding for a training simulator that will, among other things, train recruits and current firefighters in search techniques. This will have benefit to fire departments throughout the district as well as the state. I was proud to support the services application for that grant, and happy to lead a letter of support signed by the entire Massachusetts delegation in support of that grant, and I'm so happy to see it come through. And in terms of public health, a bipartisan bill recently passed by Congress will have significant impact here in Massachusetts as well. This was a program that would make sure that doctors who are providing care under Medicare would continue to get reimbursed at a reasonable rate, making sure that our seniors have access to the physicians that have long provided their health care needs. But as part of that effort, I led a bipartisan effort to include Teaching Health Centers graduate medical education program in the bill. This is a program that was set to expire this fall, but these teaching health centers play a critical role in the public health of our communities as they train primary care physicians who then go out to serve in low-income areas. The current supply of primary care physicians is insufficient to meet the healthcare needs of the American population, and this was a program focused on training more doctors and dentists to help address that growing shortfall. This 3rd District led the program that sort of created a template for training primary care physicians. Has been very successful, and I was glad to work on a bipartisan basis to make sure that this program continues. Again, to ask me a question or give your input at any point, just press *3 on your telephone. The recent Memorial Day holiday also reminds us all of the work that needs to be done on behalf of our service members. In Washington, I've continued my bipartisan work to combat sexual assault in the military. This year's defense bill, the National Defense Authorization Act, includes the Support Act, which, again, I worked across the aisle on this provision with Congressman Mike Turner, a Republican from Ohio, and this bill will increase resources and protection for survivors, challenge the services to better prevent retaliation for those who come forward, and for the first time really ask the services to look hard at how to support male victims who have been the victims of sexual assault. As much as we hear about the many women who are assaulted, the raw numbers show that there are more male-on-male assaults than male on female. Higher percentages among women, but the raw numbers are higher among men. And it also seeks to improve a very successful program, the Special Victims Counsel program, that has really led to many more victims being willing to come forward and pursue charges through the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Again, remember to ask me a question or give your input at any point. Just press *3 on your telephone. Again, this Congress, I was also proud to be elected by my colleagues to serve in a leadership role on the National Natural Resources Committee. This is a committee that oversees our federal lands, among other things, and I am now the ranking member on the subcommittee, which is responsible for all matters related to the national park system, our U.S. forests, public lands, and national monuments. The 3rd District of Massachusetts is home to some great national parks, the Minuteman National Historical Park and the Lowell National Historical Park. And I sought that committee out because of that and the National Wildlife Refuges we're also home to. And in this capacity this year, I've overseen numerous hearings since the start of the year that focus on the policy surrounding our national parks, our forests, how we prevent wildfire across the west of this country where wildfire is such a challenge, and many other critical environmental issues. Also, this year, our national parks will be getting special attention. For the next year, the Park Service will be holding a year-long celebration leading up to August 2016, when the National Park Service will turn 100, and would love to have people talk about the important role that national parks have played in their lives. Any particular memories anybody has from making a visit. And the Lowell Sun recently ran an article with a report that showed that national parks have tremendous economic impact as well. For example, the Lowell National Historical Park had an economic impact of more than $40 million a year on Lowell and the surrounding towns. So that means that there are many jobs that are supported by these parks, and while those dollars show the economic impact through visitation, they do not include the many other ways in which our national parks make economic contributions to their communities. In Lowell, for example, millions of dollars that have been spent and invested in the historic infrastructure of the city. So in my role on federal lands, I've been working to make sure that our national parks have the resources they need to effectively continue their mission of preservation, conservation, and education. Again, to ask me a question or give your input, just press *3 on your telephone. So these are just a few of the important issues facing our nation that I've been able to work on as the 114th Congress moves on. Your feedback is so important in helping us in Washington focus on the priorities that matter most to my constituents. This telephone town hall is a real chance for me to interact directly with you and for me to hear your opinions and insights. So I'm eager to hear your input and your questions. And with that, I'd like to turn it over now to your questions. Again, if you would like to ask me a question, please press *3 on your telephone.
All right. Thank you, Congresswoman. And our first question tonight is going to be Keith from Townsend. Keith, you're on with Congresswoman Tsongas.
Hello, Congresswoman Tsongas.
Good evening, Keith.
Good evening. I know we all agree that sequestration must stop. What are you doing to stop sequestration, and what bills are you currently sponsoring or co-sponsoring to stop sequestration?
Well, I did sponsor the bill that relieved sequestration for several years. It was called the Budget Control Act, and it acknowledged that sequestration was never designed to go into effect. I think as it was part of legislation that was brought forward in order to acknowledge and honor the debt ceiling that we had and raise the debt ceiling to honor America's debts. Sequestration was put out there as a challenge to a bipartisan challenge for the parties to come together and find a way forward. The reality is that, but sequestration, the Budget Control Act, is about to run out, and we confront yet again the challenge of sequestration. As a member of the Armed Services Committee, I hear over and over and over again from the chiefs of staff of the different services as to the challenges posed by sequestration, and it's twofold. One is just the sheer level of cuts that they have to absorb run the risk of really undermining the readiness of our soldiers as they are asked to confront enemies all around the country, all around the world. And readiness is a term of art that means we have prepared and equipped our soldiers to meet the challenges they confront in the battlefield. And I consider that to be actually a moral issue, that we should never send our soldiers into a fight knowing that we haven't adequately prepared them and trained them and equipped them for whatever they may confront. And our chiefs of staff of the services have been very clear on the military side. The reality is it's also going to have real impact on the non-military side. So even if you focus just on how we best protect our nation, if you don't address the impact of sequestration, for example, on how we fund the Department of Homeland Security, or how we fund the FBI, or how we fund the CIA, all very much those part of intelligence gathering and helping to assess what are the harm our enemies seek to do. And then I also hear, for example, I had the president of a major university come in and talk about how concerned he was about our failure to invest in basic research, that these investments take many years to come to fruition, and if we don't make those investments today, we compromise the future of our country and being a leader in technological innovation. So as a member of the Armed Services Committee, this year, my colleagues across the aisle sought to address sequestration by raising and putting funding into the Defense Department in what is called the Overseas Contingency Fund. This is outside the normal budgeting process. While it acknowledged the near-term impact of sequestration, it didn't address the need the services have for long-term planning. It's a one-time fix. So I voted against that bill, knowing that we have to come with a holistic approach to it that addresses sequestration both on the defense side of our discretionary budget. Those are the decisions we make every year, and the non-defense side. And that's strongly how I feel. And as budget proposals are brought forward, I will look for one that seeks to address sequestration on both sides of the aisle. The budget compromise, the Budget Control Act, will expire at the end of the year. That was the one that did relieve sequestration for several years, and we will hopefully move forward to a bipartisan compromise that acknowledges that sequestration cannot be in place on the non-defense side of things as well as the defense side.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith, for that question. And we're going to move on now to Eugene from Lancaster. Eugene, you're on with Congresswoman Niki Tsongas.
Thank you. Good evening, Niki.
Good evening. How are you?
Well, I've been ill for quite a few months, which is why I'm calling from Ashby instead of my home in Lancaster. But I'd like to thank you and your late husband that I voted for also. And my question is, are you working to have the subsidies for solar voltaics continue beyond the December 31st deadline?
I am. I strongly support continuing the solar investment tax credit. I've signed several letters in the past, indicating my support, and because fundamentally I think renewable energy research, development, and installations are the key to the environmental future of this country as we confront the challenge of climate change, but also has great economic potential. I've seen it over and over again in the 3rd District. We really are a leader in many ways in the clean energy space, and solar does help promote reliable sources of energy while putting people to work and obviously bringing some cost savings. So I'm a strong supporter of the solar investment tax credit. As we know, clean energy projects benefit the environment and they have ripple effects throughout our economic activity. The 3rd District really has a long tradition of leading in change and has many clean energy companies here, and not the least of which is solar. So I'm a strong supporter, and I hope Eugene, that you're feeling better.
Thank you, Eugene, for that question. Again, if you want to ask the Congresswoman a question, just press *3 on your telephone at any point during the conversation tonight. And we're going to move right along to Barbara from Pepperell. Barbara, you are on the line with Congresswoman Niki Tsongas.
Good evening. Thank you for taking my call.
Good evening, Barbara.
Thank you for your service and your husband's as well. I have some concerns about a bill that I guess is coming to committee vote on Thursday, the National Energy Security Corridors Act. And I wanted to find out what your position is on it and just share with you that I'm very concerned to see any lands, federal or state or local, that have been set aside as national park, wildlife refuges, or conservation land used for this type of purpose. I understand some people may think of gas as a bridge fuel. I'm very concerned, and going along with your previous caller, that this would kind of negate the development we're doing with solar energy. So I'd just like to know your position.
It's an important question. I know that the proposed pipeline through much of the 3rd District and parts of other parts of Massachusetts extending out to New York has really raised a lot of questions, and I think primarily because the initial proposed pipeline route went through, in so many instances, conservation land or farmland or areas that had been set aside for protection one way or the other. And I was strongly opposed to that proposed route and understand the kinds of concerns that it has raised in people and in many of my constituents. And we continue to monitor all that process very carefully, and have participated and have made sure. I've made sure while I'm often in Washington, I've made sure that my staff has gone to all the local communities and made sure that the concerns of my constituents are heard as FERC considers this proposed pipeline. But you also raise a broader issue, and many of our federal lands do have opportunities for gas for development, but that is in part because many of our states have large swaths of them are federal land. So, for example, if you come from Nevada, Nevada is 85% federal lands. Many other states out in the West have 40, 50, 60% of their federal lands. And so proposals are brought forth, and there are licenses issued for different kinds of energy development. Often those licenses are issued and never actually followed on, but it's carefully monitored and carefully regulated as a consequence of that. The legislation that you're talking about, the National Security Corridors Act, does not ring a bell with me. It may well be going through a committee such as the Energy and Commerce Committee, but it is something that I'm happy to look into and then follow up with you if you would stay on the line and give us your information, and I can review it and let you know my thoughts on it. But the challenge is that we understand the long-term challenge is to get to a place where renewable energy is able to provide ever more of our energy. And that requires that we continue to invest in something like the solar investment tax credit that helps make those things economically viable. And at the same time, we're obviously been the leader in looking at wind energy as a source of energy, and we have to continue just to innovate and invest as we do as a state over and over again. But we have to be very thoughtful as we try to bridge that through fossil fuels, and natural gas is the one that we are most often presented with. So it's a careful balancing act, but in no instance should a proposed pipeline go through lands that have been set aside for conservation as the proposed Kinder Morgan pipeline initially did.
Thank you for your question. And again, just a reminder that if you'd like to ask a question to the Congresswoman, please press *3 on your telephone at any point tonight. And we're going to move right along to Dawn from Winchester, who has a question for the Congresswoman. Dawn, you're on the line with Congresswoman Niki Tsongas.
Hi, Congressman Tsongas. This is Don from Westminster, Mass.
Good evening.
Not Winchester. My question is pointed towards the TPP. I'm looking at history, and I'm looking at the NAFTA, which cost us about between $6 and $7 trillion in trade deficit. I'm also looking at the two big trading partners that the TPP would be involved with, and those are Japan and Vietnam and a bunch of other smaller countries. And we're looking at somewhere around $280-300 billion with Japan, and slightly less than that with Vietnam. And those two countries, with all the other countries added up, essentially give a negative impact on our trade deficit, where the smaller partners in the TPP give us a positive impact on the trade deficit. But the two countries, Japan and Vietnam, far outweigh the positives on the smaller countries that are involved. And my question is why is the president so adamant about pushing this through? It seems as though he has the blinders on, and he seems to be naive when it comes to the whole question of TPP, and he just seems to be pushing it through. And I know there's bipartisan opposition to it, both sides of the aisle, mostly Democrats, but there are a bunch of Republicans that are also interested in not having it go through. But your previous comments about manufacturing in Massachusetts, I just don't want to see. Nike only has 1% of its employees in the United States now, and they're the ones that are going to move their operation from China to Vietnam because the labor costs are less, and it's going to really do a number to us. And all of the ramifications with regard to how these companies can come back and essentially sue the United States if they don't make the profit margin they were going to make. To me, it's wrong. So I'd like to know.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'd like to know where you stand on it, and maybe some of the information I have is not quite correct. But I've been watching the charts and graphs and listening to some radio shows and TV shows that have addressed this, and I'm really concerned.
Well, I agree with you, and it's a twofold process. So, first of all, there's the issue of fast-track authority, which is the means by which it would be brought to Congress for a vote. And fast-track authority essentially would give Congress an opportunity to vote for it or vote against it. And I have consistently opposed it in the past because I do think it allows these trade deals to circumvent congressional input and review. And so fast-track authority is one issue, and I am absolutely opposed to it. I believe every free trade agreement should be carefully evaluated on its individual merits, and we would not really have that opportunity if it were fast-track authority. So I have a lot of concerns about that, the bypassing of congressional authority. I have concerns it's for a 6-year period, which means it would also exist under whoever becomes our next president, and we have no idea who that may or may not be at this point. And so I think it's really giving free rein for many years to whoever our future president is. And so for that and for a whole host of reasons, I've been opposed to fast-track trade promotion authority. In terms of the free trade agreement itself, I do believe that each one of these has to be evaluated on its own merits, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership really is no exception. So I look forward to reviewing the details of this particular agreement and to a robust debate in the House. But that debate will obviously be quite limited if there is no opportunity to amend it in any way. Trade agreements, I think if we look at trade agreements in general, the challenge we confront is that there are always going to be some that benefit from it, and there are going to be some that don't. And essentially you're pitting one American worker against the other. And so I think in evaluating a trade agreement, that's number one. Number two is, I think we see as the American consumer, we have access to a lot of goods that historically might not have been affordable because they simply weren't plentiful, or the cost of manufacturing them would have been too high for the average American consumer to absorb by purchasing a product. But the reality is that given the impact of past trade agreements in which we still wrestle with the consequences of that, there are many hard questions that have to be asked. And so I will look forward to carefully evaluating the final trade agreement itself and ask the kinds of questions that you have. Senator Warren has raised some very important issues, some real concerns, I think, in terms of the inability of the United States and international organizations to enforce important labor, environmental, and human rights agreements of the past. All these issues have to be evaluated individually, but I think it comes with a much higher bar and harder to support if we in Congress don't have the opportunity to change any of its provisions.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you for that question. I believe the Congresswoman has a poll question for the audience right now. Congresswoman?
Yes. One of the opportunities we have with the Teletown Hall is to get your views on a variety of issues. And so the first question is, would you agree with the Supreme Court if they decide to void a major portion of the Affordable Care Act, even if it means millions would lose their health care coverage? Press yes if you would agree with the Supreme Court decision to void part of the Affordable Care Act, and press no if you would not agree.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And we're going to go right along to our next question. We're going to go to Marjorie in Ashburnham. Marjorie, you're on with Congresswoman Tsongas.
Well, thank you. Good evening, Congresswoman Tsongas. Thank you for the great job you're doing for Massachusetts.
Thank you, Marjorie.
I had a question. As an older American, that I've been unemployed over a year, and I find at 58 it's very difficult to find a job. And I didn't know if you had any suggestions, like for older workers, that because I had worked at my previous company for almost 33 years, and so I am back in the workforce, starting from scratch again, and all I've found so far is like 4 hours a week bagging groceries. And what I want to do is I want to be able to keep my house and everything, so I'm very concerned.
Well, it is a concern. I think first and foremost we have to be sure that there's no discrimination against older workers. I think that's key. The ways in which people are recruited, the ways in which people are interviewed, the ways in which jobs are designed. I think we have to be sure that there is not some untoward form of discrimination against seniors. It's a real issue and something we have to be mindful of. One of the things that I do think would be important, and this is doesn't so much address the issue of finding a job, but just to renew our unemployment insurance. The number of impacted Americans has risen to about 2 million people, and Congress has been unwilling to renew that unemployment insurance, even though we know that extending it is critical for families. Obviously, as you're talking about the challenges you've had finding a job and your worries about being able to keep your home, that just tells us how important it is. And economists also agree that unemployment insurance remains a great way to grow our economy, that for every dollar that an individual might receive in unemployment insurance, more than $1.52 is injected into the economy. So that's really a small way of helping you through a tough time, but I think the bottom line is we just have to be very concerned and be very mindful that there is not discrimination against you as you're seeking employment. And I would encourage you to come to our office if you have any concerns about that as you've sought out employment in one place or another. We would want to know about that and maybe try to be helpful.
Thank you for your question. And again, a reminder, if you would like to ask a question tonight, just press *3 on your telephone. And we still have the poll question going. Would you agree with the Supreme Court if they decide to void a major portion of the Affordable Care Act? Press 1 for yes and press 2 for no. And while we're tallying that results, we're going to go to Jerome from Lunenburg. Jerome, you're on the line with Congresswoman Niki Tsongas.
Hi, good evening, Congresswoman.
How are you, Jerome?
Good, thank you. My question involves the fact that I am a retired military, 28 years of service, and I see a lot of legislation in Congress trying to cut back the retirement benefits that I earned during my service. Most specifically, I seek attempts to, I look like, privatize TRICARE by forcing us to go to private health insurers. And personally, I've never had a problem with TRICARE for years, and I can't see why, if something isn't broke, you got to fix it. That's one, TRICARE. I think it's absolutely unconscionable to try to privatize it. And second, I see the attempts to cut back and make the commissary such that it won't even be economical for me to go to my nearest commissary to get the savings that I've been getting over the years and that I earned. Those are my two concerns.
Well, I understand your concern, and I appreciate very much your question, because I've certainly come to appreciate, as the daughter of an Air Force colonel who spent 20 years in the services, but also as I represent this district and meet so many people. We have a multi-generational tradition of service. I meet families that have over the years sent many loved ones off to defend our country. As I said, it goes back generations, and so I do think it's our responsibility to provide our men and women, all of you in uniform, with the resources you need, both to defend our nation as we send you off into harm's way, and to honor the benefits that you have earned as a result of your service. But as we do so, we also have to consider how to balance a number of priorities, and this is particularly the case as we confront the sequester, around which there has not been a lot of agreement as to how to resolve it, so that we can begin to make more reasoned decisions about where to put our funding. So, as we try to balance the competing priorities, they include maintaining our military superiority against a variety of threats, while also honoring the programs and benefits that are necessary to retain the talent that we need, but also to honor the service of those that have provided it, and I thank you for it. With this in mind, in 2012, Congress authorized a panel of experts to review the full range of pay and benefits provided to members of the military. And in authorizing this commission, we recognize that rising personnel costs are the fastest growing part of the defense budget. So, for example, over the past decade, the cost per service member in the active duty force increased by 46%. And so by some estimates, if personnel costs continue growing at that rate, and the overall defense budget remains flat with inflation, then the personnel costs will consume almost the entire defense budget. So this commission came forward with a number of recommendations that were designed to ensure the long-term viability of the all-volunteer force, while making sure that we maintain our commitment to veterans. It was composed of 8 commissioners who had extensive background in military affairs and personnel issues, and developed their recommendations in concert with surveys of more than 1 million, actually 1.5 million active duty Guard and Reserve service members. And about 30 veteran services organizations were consulted as part of this. So, and these recommendations span the full range of military benefits, some of which you have referenced. And we're moving very slowly as we address these, because we want to be sure that, as I said, we don't undermine. We have to support an active volunteer army, but we also don't want to undermine the promise we've made to those who've served. So I welcome your question. It reminds us of the challenge we have.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you, Jerome. Appreciate your question. And I believe, Congresswoman Tsongas, you have another poll question for the audience tonight?
Yes, the question I have is, the Supreme Court will rule this summer on whether or not same-sex marriage is protected by the United States Constitution. Press 1 if you believe same-sex marriage should be allowed nationwide, as it is allowed in Massachusetts already. Press 2 if you believe it should be decided on a state-by-state basis. And press 3 if you are undecided. So press 1 if you believe same-sex marriage should be allowed on a nationwide basis. Press 2 if you believe it should be decided on a state-by-state basis. And press 3 if you are undecided.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And our next question is going to be Heidi from Ashburnham. Heidi, you're on the phone with Congresswoman Tsongas.
Yes, thank you. My question is, I would like to know where you stand on the amount of testing that's been going on in our public schools, both in Massachusetts and across the country. If you could speak about PARCC testing, MCAS testing for special needs students, the ALT portfolios that special needs teachers are required to put together with their students that go along with the standards and the framework. But often some of our students are maybe functioning at a level that is way lower, in that even understanding the question that's being asked of them, they're unable to do that. But still, we have to submit testing to the state of Massachusetts that really doesn't show anything for certain students. So I'm asking actually several questions in that one, I believe. So I would just like to hear your opinion on it.
Are you a teacher, Heidi?
I am.
You are a teacher. Well, the issue of testing is a real one, and I certainly hear about it from people, teachers in the system, parents as well, local school districts that really do wrestle with it. And the reality is that the federal government has a very limited role to play in education, and it comes in at certain strategic points. So, for example, and I'm committed to fully funding of Head Start, for example, because we know what access to early education, what a difference it can meet. At the other end of the spectrum, we are the source of Pell Grants, which is a primary source of funding to help students and families absorb the cost of higher education. And in the middle is the No Child Left Behind Act, or what was initially called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was a landmark piece of legislation that was signed into law under President Johnson as a piece of his war on poverty. And it was really born of the disparities in education across school systems and across states and across the varying states in this country. So, for example, I attended a conference a number of years ago in which the states of the country were compared with the countries of the world. And Massachusetts rated as one of the best, having some of the best school systems universally across the state, some of the best school systems in the country, and it was competing with some of the most developed countries of the world. So, for example, Germany. Whereas there are other states that were performing on a level with some of the least developed countries in the world. And so that tells you the disparity in funding and the disparity in achievement that our schools have across this country. And that piece of legislation was really born of those disparities and feeling that somehow the playing field had to be leveled. And testing became a mechanism by which to measure that. And obviously, while there are values to it, there is a value to it in sort of having some objective measure. Obviously, the issues you're raising show that it has its limits. And I think as we move forward with reauthorizing the No Child Left Behind Act, which is the version of the original act that now is in force, we've got to take a hard look at those and just be common sense about it. There have been two different versions of this bill that have come out of the House and the Senate. I've had real issues with what my colleagues across the aisle have proposed and have not been able to support it. And I would look for a bipartisan bill that recognizes the disparities in education, finds ways to level the playing field, because in the end we rise and fall together, but also addresses the kinds of issues that you've brought forward, because they're obviously real and born of your experiences. So I thank you for the question.
Thank you, Heidi, for your question. And again, if you would like to ask a question at any point, please press *3 on your telephone. And our next question is going to be Pamela from Winchendon. Pamela, you're on the line with Congresswoman Niki Tsongas.
Hi, Congresswoman Niki Tsongas.
Hi, Pamela.
Thank you for doing this town hall. I'm just wondering what is being done to improve the mental health situation in this country. There's many families across the country that have suffered from someone who didn't get help when they should have, and who oftentimes someone with a mental problem refuses to get help, and you can't get them to get help, and it's sort of a catch-22. And, it's just a concern of, like, what happened to Gabby Giffords. There are many instances where these situations happen, and it just seems like we've abandoned, as a country, people with mental health problems because they're chronic problems. They're hard to help. Costs a lot of money to deal with.
And there's no easy fix to so many of them.
Right.
So I just actually had a conversation today with a gentleman has had several of his children wrestle with mental health issues, and we both were commenting on this very issue, the lack of access to care, either because it's not affordable or the lack of sufficiently trained, the lack of sufficiency of those who have been trained in the field, and again, because they are challenges that are so hard to, they're hard to address. They're complicated to address, very complex. I have supported bills during the last Congress that have tried to make access to mental health care treatment more widespread. I will continue to stay focused on it. I know when Congressman Kennedy was in office, he's no longer in Congress, but he introduced and finally will put into law the mental health parity bill, which recognized that there had to be a greater recognition of the challenges of mental health. As a member of the Armed Services Committee, we see over and over again the issues that active duty and veterans confront as a result of their services in war, or even before they made their way into the services. And in last year's defense bill, I authored a provision that would require a study to be sure that would help us get better data on the tracking of suicides among military family members, just so we understand what the challenges are. But I agree with you that there is much more that needs to be done, both in making sure that the adequacy of services are out there, that we have enough healthcare professionals, that the healthcare professionals are suited to the task that they have. And it's complicated, but we're going to have to stay on this, because I think there's an ever-growing recognition that it's something that we've neglected and we need to stay on top of. So I thank you for your question, but I don't have a simple answer at this. We're trying in our ways, but I don't know that we've done enough yet. We need to do more.
Thank you, Pamela, for your question. And we're going to move right along to Dave from Lunenburg. Dave, you're on the line with Congresswoman Niki Tsongas.
Thank you. Good evening, Congresswoman.
Good evening, Dave.
My question deals with the Kinder Morgan natural gas pipeline project. 8 to 10 months ago, much was said about this project, and frankly, I think the news, at least on the radio, TV, and in print, has dissipated somewhat. From your perspective, as it relates to your district, how do you see this project unfolding, and do you feel that there will be an opportunity to work out a compromise so that we could make it a palatable situation for both sides?
Well, it's a good question, and I give the many communities in the district who were going to be impacted by the proposed pipeline, I give all those communities real credit for the ways in which they really have made their voices heard. So just for a little background, Kinder Morgan is an energy transportation company. It provides the pipeline through which natural gas flows, filed a preliminary proposal with FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee, for a new gas pipeline, and it would have run approximately 250 miles through New York, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. As a result of the extensive public input that I referenced, Kinder Morgan has altered their original route to use. Now they're going to use an existing utility right-of-way in New Hampshire, which will reduce the number of disturbed parcels and conservation land that initially were going to be impacted impacted in Massachusetts. The proposed route of the main line and the laterals, those are the lines that run out from them, crosses through, was as proposed, across through 37 towns in Massachusetts, including 7 communities in the 3rd District. And just recently, actually, they withdrew a number of their lateral proposals that were going to impact Bolton and Berlin. So they're hoping to get all the permit approvals by November 2016 and put the pipeline in service by late 2018. New England does, like many areas around the country, face energy challenges. We've got to make some careful and strategic long-term planning in order to lower energy prices and maintain the reliability of the energy supply. I do hear from residents and businesses who are having difficulties absorbing the increasing cost of electricity that they had to absorb in the winter months of 2014-15. So there are challenges that we have to seek to address, but I think we have to do it in a way that is very mindful of the values we have in our communities. The fact that conservation land is set aside in perpetuity to be protected, not to be an easy source or a silent source of land to run a pipeline through. So I think there's careful balancing that has to be done. And as I said, I've heard from hundreds of 3rd District residents who've expressed their concern with the pipeline. Kinder Morgan has responded to these concerns by reducing the impact of the pipeline on public and private conservation land, which is a step in a positive direction, but there are still a number of concerns. It still will pass through some historic local farmlands. I know that. Wildlife management areas near schools. So a lot of issues that have to be confronted. And I've written to both FERC and Kinder Morgan expressing my opposition to the proposed pipeline route. And I've asked that FERC make sure that the public process is open and robust so that all the concerns can be appropriately studied and that they undertake the more comprehensive of the environmental impact statements so that they fully understand what the potential impacts could be rather than short-circuiting that process. And I've joined with my colleague, Congressman McGovern, to make sure that Kinder Morgan delay its open houses so that impacted constituents could have more time to review the proposed route before their open house meetings begin. But as I say, they filed their first preliminary application with FERC on September of this year or last year, and that's the body that oversees the projects. And the company's now entered into a review process, and Kinder Morgan will be required to submit alternative route proposals, which they have, and moved much of it up through New Hampshire, but in a utility right-of-way that currently exists. But it still does impact this district, and we have to stay very much on top of it.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Congresswoman. And our next question, Jonathan from Lunenburg. Jonathan, you're on the line with Congresswoman Niki Tsongas.
Hello, Congresswoman Tsongas, and thank
Hello,
you for
Jonathan.
taking... Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you.
I'd like to thank you and Paul for your many years of service. And my question is, I became an attorney and sworn into the Mass Bar 11 years ago, of which I'm very proud. And then I had a long gap taking care of my elderly parents. And I'm really struggling to get back into the workforce after such a long gap and into my profession. And I would like to know what you will do to help the plight of the long-term unemployed and specifically new attorneys.
Well, I commend you for being a lawyer. As you know, I'm a lawyer as well, or you may not know that. I'm a lawyer as well. I got my law degree in 1988 and opened a practice in Lowell, Massachusetts for a number of years. And so, but it is a field that has much changed. I know that, and ever more difficult to be a sole practitioner or to operate in a small setting. But I do appreciate your commitment to the law, and the opportunities going to law school can be multifaceted in nature. So, but it's quite an undertaking and a commitment. What I can address is just the issue of having paid sick time in order to care for a family member. because half of Americans lack paid sick time to either take care of themselves or to care for a family member. And in addition, millions of workers cannot use their own paid sick time to care for ill family members. I'm not sure what moved you, if it was just the demands of caring for your patients that led you to leave your employment in order to care for them. I commend you for it. It's not a simple thing to do, and obviously it's come at a high cost to you. But I am a co-sponsor of the Healthy Families Act, which would allow Americans to earn paid sick time so that they can address their own health care needs and the health needs of their families. If there's anything we can do to individually help you, please reach out to our office. We're happy to talk with you to see if there's anything in particular that we can do to be helpful. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming and participating in tonight's Teletown Hall meeting. As you can see, technology really does create an opportunity for us to talk together and for me to hear what's on your minds. The discussion was so helpful to me, useful as it always is. And when I hear directly from you about matters of things that are really important to you. If I didn't have a chance to get your question this evening, there will be an opportunity for you to leave me a voicemail in just a minute, and we'll be happy to get back to you on your question. But it's very important that if you want to get an answer to your question, that you leave your name, address, phone number, and email. You can also visit my website at www.tsongas.house.gov or follow me on Facebook and Twitter to learn more about what I'm working on or to let me know your thoughts or questions. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/repsongas and on Twitter at Niki in the House. And we will post the results of our survey to let you know how you all felt about these various issues. So thank you again for choosing to participate in tonight's Teletown Hall meeting. I've enjoyed very much our conversation. Good evening.